Welcome, good morning and good afternoon. I'm Lucy Stevens. I'm Practical Action's Acting Director of Impact and Influence and the head of our Cities Fit for People programme. At Practical Action, we're an NGO with 55 years of experience and over 20 years working with urban, slum and low income communities. Next slide, please. So in our program, what we feel like we do best is understand the needs and solutions that work for vulnerable urban communities, working with existing stakeholders and trying to create that a kind of sustained and systemic change. Next slide, please. I thought that I would just briefly outline, as we start this session, the approach that we take in improving citywide FSM fecal sludge management services, because this is a thread that you'll see throughout the 3 case studies that we'll be talking and sharing about today. There are a number of elements, but the key one that to focus on now here is the one at the which says bottom up, that bottom up element, where at the core of our work, we're interested in finding ways for existing stakeholders, existing pit emptiers to play a central part in expanded, better quality FSM services. Because while informal manual pit emptiers are often working in very unsafe ways for themselves and their communities, they also hold a lot of knowledge about the pits, how to effectively empty them. They are responsive, their services are often affordable, and they are known to and trusted by their customers. So to build on this approach, our approach has been to understand who's already providing a service, map their needs, create new partnerships, and where that's needed, introduce innovative kinds of new equipment, infrastructure or services. Next, please. So what to expect in the session today. We'll hear how we've been supporting citywide systems for FSM in 3 locations in Kenya, Bangladesh and India. These are mostly smaller secondary towns. And what's particularly interesting is that these systems have been running for several years. So we've been building up customers and experiences in terms of demand, costs and so on. In each of those cases, you'll hear from our own team who we'll welcome as we go along, and we'll share video footage directly from pit emptiers and community members. We're exploring a couple of key questions. The first one is can informal sanitation workers deliver citywide services? And the second point is really how best to invest public money for citywide sanitation and what outcomes do you choose to prioritize with that money? I've explained why we think that a best approach is to work with existing actors. The second point is about public money. It's important because I think there's a growing recognition that public money is needed to pay for elements of a good sanitation and FSM system. Good sanitation is a public health good, after all. But what do you want from that money? Provision for all, job creation, efficiencies in how you spend that money above all. And these are political choices as well as economic ones. And so for that analysis of some of those choices and economic realities, we've worked in partnership with Leeds University, Jonathan Wilcox and Barbara Evans and others in their team. Using their cactus model, they've analysed the business models and costs for FSM in each of our cases. And Jonathan will take us through those findings and their implications. At the end of, once we've gone through those case studies, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. Now, if you have questions, please go ahead and put them on the chat on the session page in Pathable. That's where we'll be following. So please put your questions on there. On that session page, in the tab there, you'll also find a range of resources to view this presentation, videos that we're sharing, and a couple of infographics and further information to follow up. So do explore those resources there. At the end of the session, Barbara will wrap up with and help us in pulling out some of the key threads. Just before we kick off, and perhaps as we go along, there is a poll on the page as well, just so that we can gauge where we are in terms of participants and your thinking about the role that informal sanitation workers can play in delivering citywide safely managed services. You can choose whether you think they might play a small, medium or a large role. So do go ahead and and vote in that if you have a view. I don't know if I'll be able to show the results yet, and if you're able to vote. Would you like to go to the next slide? Go ahead. Okay, so as the votes are coming in, I'm seeing so far that around 97% think they can play a medium role and will continue to serve those who can't be reached. And oh, it's changing a bit. 88% think that they can play a large role, supported to professionalize and provide a responsive service to the majority of people. All right, so votes are still coming in. We might return to that a little later and see if further people have voted, and we'll share those results again in a bit. Okay, lovely. So without further ado, let's move on and crack on with the 3 case studies we wanted to share with you today. I'd like to hand over to my colleague Matthew Okello, who's coming to you live from Kisumu in Kenya. Matthew.
Thank you so very much, Lucy. Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Okello. I work with Practical Action. I am based in Kisumu City, Kenya. I will be giving a brief overview of the city, and then Jonathan will be able to share part of the case studies that we have been able to document. Thank you and most welcome. Now, Kisumu City is the 3rd largest city in Kenya, situated in Kisumu County, in the western part of the region. And the city has a population of approximately 500,000 people. And most of these people, up to about 60% of them, live in low-income settlements. To get a deeper understanding of the situation, Practical Action undertook situational analysis in 2015, just to get a deeper understanding of the status of sanitation in some of these informal settlements. And based on our findings, only 16% of the city of Kisumu has sewerage systems. That means all 84% of the population in these settlements rely on on-site sanitation facilities and services. The study also did show that the most common type of latrines are pit latrines, the most common type of toilets are pit latrines, used by up to 93% of the households who are living in these low-income settlements. Now, these latrines are shared, and our findings showed that up to 7 households use or share a latrine. Their conditions are poor. The findings showed that up to 37% of the latrines were dirty, are filled up, or they needed a bit of emptying. The latrines fill up rapidly because of the high water table and soil conditions that obtain in Kisumu City and environs. And the latrines neither provide privacy nor safety to the users, especially children, women, and the elderly. Manual pit emptying was common, but conditions were quite poor. Faecal sludge was either dumped into the open or channeled into open drains or pits dug next to the filled up latrines. And pit emptying as a service was highly stigmatized. And as a result of this, the service providers worked at night to disguise themselves and to escape arrest by public health officials. This, you can understand, actually did compromise the level of services and the conditions of services which were provided sometimes under the cover of darkness. So what did we do as Practical Action? Practical Action has been working with the community members, relevant departments of the county government of Kisumu, and of course, service providers to bring about change. We have worked with landlords and tenants to improve latrine conditions and access to sanitation services. Some of the things we did was to develop appropriate and affordable latrine designs, in some cases with provision for pit emptying. These designs were approved en masse by the relevant department of the county government so that the landlords do not have to seek approval each and every time they want to dig a pit latrine. We worked again with the latrine construction artisans to train them on how to build these technologies. And this has brought about a lot of improvement in terms of the condition of sanitation facilities and services that now exist within the informal settlements where we have been working. The manual pit emptiers worked haphazardly. In many cases, they worked alone, but we have been able to bring them together into associations. They have been trained on a number of issues, including occupational health and safety. They have been vaccinated against hepatitis B, typhoid, and cholera, just to protect them against occupational hazards that go on with manual pit emptying as a service. We have improved the kind of technology that they're using. Originally, they would use buckets and soap and rope, as we all know, but this has been improved. At the moment, they're using galper machines to improve pit emptying, and recently, they've been provided with a rickshaw for more cost-effective means of transport. Of course, we all understand that transportation remains one of the biggest challenges to manual pit emptiers, and perhaps the highest cost element in their businesses. So at the moment, they have been provided with a rickshaw to improve the cost of transporting sludge from the settlements to the designated disposal sites. We supported the emptiers to develop standard operating procedures which regulate how the practice is done, and this also ensures their own safety and, of course, the safety of the environment. In addition, the pit emptiers have been linked to the water utility, Kiwasco in this case, and public health departments to ensure that they provide professional services and that the service is properly regulated to ensure that we protect the environment even as we render this important service. The next slides will be presented by my colleague, Jonathan, who will share with us some of the case study of our work. Thank you for listening. Jonathan.
Thanks, Matthew. That was a great summary of the context for manual emptying in Kisumu. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Wilcox, and I'm a researcher at the University of Leeds in the United Kingdom. I can't see the slides at the moment, but I'd like to move to the next one. Thank you, Casper. There we go. Yeah, could you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So during the last 18 months, I've been supporting practical action to document the different business models of sanitation service providers in the 3 case study cities, which we'll be looking at today. This analysis has included 3 things. So first, how the business models that were implemented differ from how they were initially planned. Second, how which parameters affect business model performance. And thirdly, an analysis of the revenue and cost for each service provider and the FSM system as a whole. The financial analysis which we undertook uses the total annualized cost per household metric, which annualizes long and short-term costs into a single value per household to allow us to compare different services with each other. And it was developed by another research group at the University of Leeds. So I'm going to speak twice today about results, firstly from Kisumu, and then later on about Faridpur in Bangladesh. And the main message which I would like to share from the study across the 3 case study cities is that informal emptying and transport service providers can be profitable whilst providing a safe service, which includes PPE, vaccinations, suitable equipment, and transport of faecal sludge to treatment. But there are a few customers currently willing and able to pay for this improved service. Okay, could we move to the next slide, please, Casper? Thank you. So in Kisumu, we interviewed one of the 3 formalized manual emptying enterprises, the community social enterprise, Vukusasa. They empty pit latrines manually using a gulper and transport the sludge in 200-litre barrels on a rented pickup truck to a wastewater treatment lagoon nearby to the neighbourhood in which they work. In this slide, I've summarized the main findings from the financial analysis of Fukusasa's business model. First, they operate a break-even business model where they share the revenue from emptying work after paying all of their immediate costs. Secondly, their main cost is pick-up rental, and this may represent an efficiency opportunity in the future if Fukusasa scale their business and finance their own vehicle and are able to reduce their overall costs. Thirdly, the utility operating the treatment lagoon had not introduced a tipping fee, but planned to in the future, and that this would impact Fukusasa's business model. Fourthly, some additional startup costs were funded by Fukusasa's partners and are shown in the third column. They represent a small overall proportion of the cost of providing the service, and it is likely that they could be included in Fukusasa's and other business models in the future as they start to manage longer-term finances. And finally, I wanted to compare Fukusasa's cost base with other similar service providers globally and found that they're operating at similar cost. Okay, so now I'd like to hand over and we'll watch a short video from Kasumu. Thank you.
Project have impacted the life of the individual in Fukusasa. Those are the pit emptiers, because before even the pricing was a problem. Currently they're doing it professionally. Those who are not even having a house to rent, now they can stay in the household. I can say it has created job opportunity for the youths. Secondly, it has improved the sanitation standard within the informal settlements. Thirdly, it has improved the work of the public health within the informal settlement, because before we were having a lot of open edification within the community, but currently through this we are working closely with the community health volunteers, and we are also working closely with the landlords, and that has really improved the sanitation standard within the informal settlement. Currently it's a teamwork. We work as the sanitation pit emptiers, that's Fukusasa. We work with the sanitation champions, which we have in each and every unit. Two, we are working closely with the CHVs, which was not there, and also we work closely with the PHO and the sanitation health actors. So it has improved that teamwork to improve the sanitation standard within the informal.
Toto sasa hata wakicheza wanacheza freely. Ile unaweza kuogopa mtoto ataanguka kwenye shimo ama choo imejaa. Saa hizi maisha imebadilika, usafi imekuwa hali ya juu. Pesa ile tulikuwa tunatumia kwa magonjwa, tunatumia kwa kazi nyingine sasa.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And I think that video gives us an amazing sense of how the pit empty is a part of a wider team effort at the community level, which has been really important in improving sanitation standards overall in Kisumu. So we're going to move on to our second case study now, which is from Faridpur in Bangladesh. And I'd like to welcome my colleague Uttam Saha, from who's speaking to us from Dhaka in Bangladesh. Uttam, please.
Yes, Lucy, thank you. Good afternoon and good morning. So let me share what we have learned from Faridpur, particularly for improving the citywide efficient sanitation services and how informal sanitation worker really played an important role and is still continuing that important role for improving that service. Kasper, can you share the presentation? Yes, okay. So next slide, please. Basically, in my presentation, so we started from 2014. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we started in 2014, and we undertook a study to understand the overall sanitation situation in Paritpur. We found that at the time, 95% of the population, they were using the toilet, but the biggest problem was about the safely management of the fecal sludge. So that was only 10%, and that was basically a burial system. So that we have found. Next slide, please. So the key problems we have found that the unsafe and inappropriate containment in terms of the design and construction, that is a big problem we saw. The manual emptying and transportation are available in a limited scale, both by the city and informal groups. And another big problem was they did not have any particular place for disposal, and they did not have any treatment plant. So altogether, if we tried to understand the overall FSM system in the lens of the market. So what we have found that at that time, the municipality only reached 20% of the customers, who are basically the well-off people and live in the big lane. So the slum dwellers and low-income communities are unserved because of their location. Most of them are basically on the bank of the river, on the embankment and slope. They're narrow. They had very narrow lane. And very interesting, the service that was municipality was providing, that was a subsidized service, 300% subsidized service, what we have found. And we found that the informal groups, they have a big share, especially for serving the low income communities. And we also talked with several private businessmen. They were reluctant to join public-private partnership because they do not see any productivity of the business in that case. And the biggest problem we have found that the community awareness and education was quite less. So that actually leads to unauthorized and untreated disposal. And next slide, please, Kasper. Yeah, so we tried to understand why the customers prefer the informal emptiers. We found that they are easy to reach. They are quite quick responsive, and they are also very low cost. They provide the low cost services, so this is very affordable, particularly for the low income communities. And within the informal group, we have found they have different service provision. Sometimes they work individually, sometimes they work in small groups, and they have different service. So they have the burial system, and sometimes they are taking to the offsite and disposing. Although there was not a permanent place for the disposal, but they were disposing indiscriminately, but they have that system. And they're quite adapted. Any customers, they need to change in date and time to get the service, they were quite adaptive. And also that was the only solution for providing the last miles. But we have identified there are a couple of issues related with the manual emptying. So mostly these are the manual emptying, which is definitely the unhygienic, and they did not use any protection. They did not have any they had a lot of issue about the security for doing the job in the night time, and social taboo was also there. So next slide, please. Then we worked with the municipality, and we jointly developed a business model, and we presented this business model to the municipal council. The model is like that: if municipalities stop their delivering services by themselves, on top of that, what they can do, they can outsource the dislodging services to the cooperative group, to the cooperative of the informal group. So if the informal group are better being organized and they have a company, and if they can provide the services, that will be great. But that services, that is not a, they will have a service level agreement. So with that agreement, they will provide the dislodging services, and the cooperative group are not allowed to dispose the sludge indiscriminately. So the municipality will set up a treatment plan, and the group will bring the sludge to the treatment plant, and municipality will also engage another operator, which is the SDC. So who will manage the SDC is a local NGO who have a farming program. So they will manage the treatment plant, and they will also report to the municipality, and municipality will basically regulate different standard for providing all of these services. So This was the model, and the municipality agreed with this model, but they had a very, they are not quite sure whether the informal worker really can do this job. So we support it for doing that job. So Kasper, next slide, please. The first thing that we try to organize the informal group, and we help them to get organized and to develop a company, which is the sweepers business cooperative. You see that there are organizational setup of the cooperative, and we identified initially they can start with the emptying business, but gradually they can bring other businesses like the soil dust collection, separation, processing, and other things. And within that group, they can also introduce the micro savings program. That will be really great. So next slide, please. And then we thought that we should undertake a transformative approach. So we adopted that transformative approach. The first thing of that approach, we tried to develop an organization with the company of that group. So business cooperatives, and definitely women participation was really encouraged in terms of number and position. We then focused building their skill and knowledge. We organized different training, orientation, coaching, mentoring, learning trips, and then we focused to provide some technology, particularly small scale technology like the Galpart, different pumps, transporter, and other things. And after the technology, actually, we focused that how this group can really develop the business, and in future how they can also access to finance from different financing organization apart from the microfinancing organization. Occupational health and safety, that was a big issue. So we provided the PPE supply, and we organized several campaign program with them so that they can really use that. We also realized that this is a very hazardous job, so the risks and injury, even in some cases death, are also reported. So we also introduced a social safety scheme, particularly the insurance scheme for the worker. And they had the agreement with the municipality. They had the service level agreement with the municipality. Yeah. So this is one of our transformative approach. So let me show some of the photograph of in support of a transformative approach. This is about the formation of the cooperative and agreement with the municipality. Next slide, please. So training and orientation. Next slide, please. So this is the photo that they started service using all of the protection and using the technology. So no manual emptying are there in Faridpur. So every customers are getting services using this technology, this type of technology now. Next slide, please. This is the treatment plan that the municipality said, but we provided different technological advice and support, and also for partly financial support for setting this treatment plan, where the national government is also supported municipality to buy the land. Next slide, please. So what we have found in the 4 years time, so we have found that the safe disposal increased. What was 10% in 2014, but that came to 48%. At the time, the population of the whole city was 200,000 population. So 48% actually it came in at the end of 2019, and 40% households already have accessed this system. So the 40% households are getting this, are part of this improved system. Next slide, please. The biggest sense, what we have found in the lives of the informal workers. So before introducing the system, they were used for manual emptying. So they have irregular jobs, and they were very low paid. Antisocial elements are there. So they did not have any vision. They did not have any connection and communication with the rest of the stakeholders in the city. But and they are no more an informal emptier. They are one kind of the entrepreneurs. So emptier to entrepreneur, that's the biggest sense what we have found. And their income, their voice, and their relationship, their networking, that have already, it was very useful to access other benefits and services from the society. So that we have already observed. Next slide, please. So what we have learned from this citywide system, that the cooperatives really can run a mechanical dislodging business as a profitable business, and they can serve the last mile people. And if we increase their skill in, that will also help to income. Their income improvement is also possible, and their behavior and practice is also it's possible. Changing their behaviors and practice is also possible. But to do that, to achieve that, actually, we do not take the project approach. Rather than we should take a long-term transformative approach is required to achieve the scale. So next slide, please. So what we have found now, this transformative model, actually, LGED is a national department who are implementing several urban development projects. So one of their projects, which is the urban governance infrastructure and improvement, supported by the Asian Development Bank and working in 36 cities. So they adopted this model in their cities. Even particularly for the FSM in Bangladesh, recently developed FSM institutional and regulatory framework, as well as also the national action plan. So they strongly recommended this model, that how informal workers can be transformed as an entrepreneur. And we are now talking with the Ministry of Labor that how really can they set and monitor the standard for the informal sanitation workers in Bangladesh. So that we are now doing, it's not only the practical action, but all of the major sanitation stakeholders in Bangladesh, we are working together to achieve this target. So that's all about from my side. Thank you. Yeah. And requesting Jonathan, our colleague from the University of Leeds, to share the findings from the business and financial analysis from these services. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Uttam, and thanks for your summary from Faridpur. So in Faridpur, me and my team, we collected data about 2 service providers along the value chain: Kuti Barry, a cooperative providing emptying and transport services, and SDC, an organisation operating the combined faecal sludge treatment plant, solid waste treatment plant, and compost production facility. This diagram shows the relationships between the many service providers along the sanitation value chain, and it captures a lot of information: the physical infrastructure, business activities, asset ownership, external support, transfer of faecal sludge, transfer of information, contractual relationships, and financial transfers. I think it's fair to say that there's quite a lot going on in this system in Faridpur, but I'm going to move on now to the next slide, please, and focus just on Kuti Barry. So we can use this diagram to focus and zoom in on Kuti Barry's service and look specifically at the relationships that they have with other stakeholders in the system, with households, the call centre, the municipality, and the operator of the FSTP. Could I have the next slide, please, Casper? So financial analysis of Kuti Barry's business model has shown a few key things. They are a profitable emptying and transport service provider, but that the rate that the municipality rent the vacuum tub to Kuti Barry for does not represent the whole life cost of purchasing and maintaining this piece of equipment. So if Kuti Barry financed their own emptying equipment, and at the current level of utilisation, it would increase their total costs and they may not be profitable. Could I have the next slide, please, Casper? Thank you. So this figure captures aspects of SDC, the treatment plant operator's business model. They operate the FSTP on behalf of the municipality under a service level agreement. They don't have any capital costs. These are all covered by the municipality. They receive faecal sludge from the emptying cooperatives, treat it, blend it with treated solid waste, and produce a compost for sale to farmers. This compost is their only revenue source because no tipping fee is currently collected at the FSTP. Could I have the next slide, please, Casper? Thank you. So here I've compared the costs and revenues of SDC's business model. And it's clear that revenue from compost sales is not enough to fund operation of the FSTP. And in addition, this does not include the capital costs of constructing and maintaining the FSTP, which are currently borne by the municipality. Although the plant is operating at below half of its design capacity, and increasing throughput through the plant would reduce the overall unit cost if the plant receives more faecal sludge. So it's clear that an operational funding gap for this faecal sludge treatment plant service provider business model exists. Can I have the next slide, please, Casper? Thank you. So in this slide, I've combined the revenue and costs of delivering everything along the sanitation value chain after containment, so emptying, transport and treatment services. And we can see that there is both a funding gap for operation alone and for all of the costs, for the overall costs. This is partly because the system is operating below capacity and that increasing coverage would reduce the overall cost per household of providing the service. However, I think it's likely that a funding gap would remain even if coverage was increased. Thank you. Can I have the next slide, please, Casper? So in conclusion, there are a few takeaways from faecal that I wanted to highlight at the end here. The emptying co-ops are profitable, but they're not paying the full cost of the vacuum tug. But treatment and reuse does not appear to be commercially viable, and this is probably likely to be true even at full scale. But there are many efficiency opportunities across the service model as a whole. Now I'd like to hand over for a video from Farid Paul. Thank you.
আমার স্কুল সংলগ্ন বাথরুম এটা অনেক সময় এমন হয় যে আমাদের যাতায়াত খুব সমস্যা হয় বর্ষার সময় দেখা যায় যে এটা ভইরা অনেক পানি হয় এটা পরিষ্কারের কোনো ব্যবস্থা নাই বাচ্চা কাচ্চা ভালোভাবে স্কুল আসতে পারে সেই ব্যবস্থা করার জন্য এটা একটা সুন্দর ব্যবস্থা করা প্রয়োজন
আমরা বস্তি বেশি গরিব মানুষ আমাদের মূল্যায়ন করে না বা আমাদের সময়ের দাম দেয় না আজ আসেন কাল আসেন পরশুদিন পরে সুইপার পটি গেলে সুইপার অনেক টাকা চায় সুইপার এখন তোমরা রাত্রে যাবো পরে আমরা থাক পরিষ্কার করলাম পরে আমরা তো 500,000 টাকা দিয়ে কাঁচা ল্যাট্রিন বসাইনি পরে যখন বর্ষা আসে বর্ষার পানিতে ধুয়ে নিয়ে যায় পরিষ্কার
এরা আমাদের গাড়ি দিছে গাড়ি দেওয়ার পরে হ্যান্ড মেশিনটা আমরা ময়লা টাইনি নেই হাতে গ্লোভস তারপরে মুখে এই মাস্ক এখন আমাদের প্রাণের ঝুঁকি কম এই ডায়রিয়া হইতো আপনার এই ঘামাচির মতন অনেক কিছুই হইতো মাসে ডাক্তারে এটা লাগেও নাও রাখতে পারে
যে আমার মাঝে যে লোকগুলো আছে তারা বাইরে যে কোনো একটা অসুখ হলে কি বিয়া শাদীর ব্যাপার হলে মানুষের কাছে হাত পাতা লাগতো টাকার জন্য আর আমার এই সমিতিটা দেওয়ার পরে মানুষের কাছে হাত পাতা লাগে না যেন আমার সমিতির থেকে আসলেই একটা অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করলে আমরা তাকে ওই অ্যাপ্লিকেশনের মাধ্যমে তাকে টাকা দিই যে কোনো আপদ বিপদে বিয়া শাদীতে আমরা টাকাটা দিই তখন এই টাকাটা তারা এই কিস্তি হিসাবে আমাদেরকে মাসে দুইবার এই টাকাটা কিস্তি হিসাবে আমাকে শুধরায় আস্তে আস্তে 10 মাসের টাইম আমাদের
हम एक दिन करेছি আমরা আরেকজন সে একদিন করেছে মানে মোটামুটি 25 জন সদস্য এক একজন এক এক দিন কাম করেছে হয়তো সাতম দুজন করে যাইছে ড্রাইভার মোট 3 জন কাম করেছে টিপ হিসাবে মানে যে কাম কাজ করেছে টাকা পয়সা দেখে মানে সংসার ভালো চলেছে সরকারি হয়তো কোনো কাম কাজ নেছে তারপর অন্য টুকটাক আরো আশেপাশে অফিসার কাম করেছি কি কোনো কিনকম কাম করেছি কিন্তু এইটো আমি করে
In fact, Bangladesh is now celebrating its remarkable success of attaining 1% open defecation free status in 2015. I personally think that the basic reason behind that is it became a social movement. It was not a job of the government. It was a collaborative effort by the government, development partners and community at large. So that was the secret behind this success.
And thank you, great to hear from Haseen there at the end of the video. I'm going to move swiftly on very quickly to talk about our final case study from the small town of Denkanal in Odisha state in India. About 22% of the people there live in slum communities. Important things to note about the context here is that back in 2015, when we started this work, there was no fecal sludge treatment facility anywhere in the state. But at the same time, the Swachh Bharat mission was accelerating people's access to toilets very rapidly with a lot of political focus on that. And also, as in India, it's the case that manual or informal pit emptying is an illegal activity, which made it meant that it wasn't as really to the same extent a central part of our work there as we've seen in Kenya and Bangladesh. Next slide, please. If we can move, lovely. So what we did amongst a range of activities in a project that we worked on between 2015 and 2020, we built a fecal sludge treatment plant in the town, which has now been operating since 2018. And its operating model for the treatment plant and emptying was that we brought in a company called Hulock to run both in combination the emptying services and the treatment plant. The plant produces compost, but that's only used for the landscaping rather than sale because it hasn't got authorization for agricultural use at this point. Next slide, please. So what our analysis showed in terms of costs and revenues is that on the far right column, the two biggest costs for capital costs, and it's probably the case that those are capital costs are likely to be covered by the state or national government budgets, and that's sort of an expectation. At the same time, the green bar at the top of the middle bar shows the operating costs of the plant, which we tried to make sure we kept low through the design of the plant, which has low electricity requirements, it's gravity fed and so on. But at the same time, the total emptying revenue was not, at the time when we did this work, covering the costs of the emptying service or the treatment costs. But we felt that the revenue could probably increase through greater emptying, and the contract could probably have done more to incentivize performance that we had with Hulock. So the next slide, please. What was the case? What are the future? What does this case tell us? I think it tells us more about the choices that can be made in terms of how to spend money. The municipality liked the improved service and lack of support that this private company brought, and it was covering at the time in future it might cover its operating costs, and it had a coverage of about 20% of the time, but that was growing. But at the same time, there's been changes. Additional State has recognised that sanitation services require public expenditure, and they would rather spend that to support women's self-help groups rather than supporting companies like this. And so the contract with Hulock has ended. The municipality has now taken over emptying services, and a women's group has been appointed to run the treatment plant. So we're yet to see what that means in the future in terms of the efficiency of operations and what that will mean right across the state. So if we move to the next slide, we have a space now for some questions and answers, and we've seen that a number of them are coming through in the chat box. If you have any others, do keep posting them. Do keep posting them in there. We've seen three contrasting cases: Vukisasa, among others in Kisumu, a bigger city, a higher proportion of poorer people; Faridpur, cooperatives, a smaller town and a specifically designed treatment plant; Denkanal, business efficiencies were sought initially, but then choices have been more recently made about who should benefit from public money spent on sanitation in that context. So let's see what kinds of questions have come in. There was Mira Meta asked a question earlier on, which was about whether, which was about some problems that you can have if you leave desludging too late and then manual emptying is needed because you can't manage to suck the sludge up very, very well because it hardens. And I wondered whether anyone had a reflection on that point about how easy it is and whether scheduled desludging is something that we've considered at all in our work. I don't know whether Uttam or Matthew might.
Yeah, I mean, I can start and maybe Matthew can add. So yes, the composition of the sludge is a big issue. Can you hear me, Lucy? Yeah. Yes. Okay. So the composition of the sludge is really an issue. Particularly the customers that do not clean their toilet, empty their toilet regularly, then the sludge become really very hard and very thick. So the pump and the emptiers, they add some of the chemicals, like some of the lime, kerosene, and some other materials, and they put it on the pit or on the tank before they clean. And also we have introduced some of the special kind of cutter in the pumps and introduced in the pump system so that they can go up to a certain distance. But if it is very thick and very hard, then it is an issue. But we have already overcome some of the problem over there, but still we have to go a long way. Yeah.
Thanks. There was a question for Matthew in Kisumu, which was to do with how people are able to afford the kind of standard latrines that we mentioned. These have been quite important in helping to make pit emptying a bit easier. I think it's that kind of wider model that's included the pit emptying and improvements in sanitation that's been important there. Matthew, would you like to say something about why those standard latrines have been important?
Yes, thanks, Lucy. I have sent a response on that, but when it comes to faecal sludge emptying, of course, the prices vary depending on the volumes that are dislodged. And of course, sometimes they factor in the distance from where the settlement is to the wastewater treatment plant where it is supposed to be emptied. So those are some of the factors that are taken into account as they work out on the cost of transporting the sludge. For users who live within the plot, these are already provided by the landowner, so the tenants do not pay for use. That may already be included in the rent that they pay, so they don't have to pay on an individual use basis. But of course, there are also public sanitation facilities which are available to those who may not have completely, and those ones they use. They pay for as they use. And the charges range from Kenya shillings, 10 to 20 shillings, depending on the facility that they are going to use.
Okay, good, thank you. So I was wondering, Jonathan, if you could just give us an idea of when of how recent some of the data that you were using was. Did it and what we might need to do to update our data? There was a question about, was it dating back a few years, or maybe you can tell us about how the data that is available. It's not easy to collect, actually, in some cases.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we collected the data in February 2020, and to be able to produce the estimates, we needed to look back historically at the behavior of the various businesses to understand how things have changed over time. So it's from 2020 and before. I think updating it would be relatively straightforward because it's a case of just plugging in updated numbers into spreadsheets, which everybody loves to do. Yeah. But I think the situation has changed quite a lot. So it's a good question. It would be interesting to see how the situation has changed and how the financial numbers have responded.
Yes, I think it's something it would be very good for us to be able to return to see how things, if coverage is increasing, numbers are increasing, as I know they are. Uttam, I don't know, can you tell us briefly how things have grown from 10% coverage up to 48% coverage? Are the pit empties continuing to add customers in Faridpur?
Yes, of course, the trend is growing. And initially, the municipality had problem with the procurement of different dislodging truck. So now the Puitman municipality have got 6 other backtracks from different national projects. So the municipality is expecting that they are gradually actually increasing the coverage. And also, apart from the backtrack, we have also introduced the gulper, motorized gulper and non-motorized gulper. We have recently introduced the super sucker pumps. These are the small dislodging technologies are also working, particularly for serving the low-income community. So altogether, the municipality is really growing, but the big challenge which we are now facing, the Faridpur municipality has migrated to a comparatively quite big city. It is no longer a town. they have increased their population, they have increased their area from, so altogether now they have 500,000 population. So to provide the citywide service, we still have to work for the extended people that they have added into the city system. Yeah.
Thank you. So now, as we're coming into the closing minutes, I'd like to, so we can bring in Barbara now, who's known some of these case studies and worked and seen them develop over a number of years with us, supporting her team of students and getting involved a bit herself. So we've talked through these case studies, we've seen the costing analysis and a couple of key questions we were trying to answer at the beginning. I wonder what you've made of it today and what your reflections would be for some takeaways for us all.
Great, thanks, Lucy. And just thanks to everybody I just want to really pay credit to everybody who's trying to support the development of this industry, because it's very dynamic, and that includes our speakers today and other people who are on the chat. I know Mira's done masses of work in this area. Dennis is also chipping in. So, so the first thing I actually wanted to say is I think it's important that we understand this question of transforming the way emptying is taking place in these cities as a dynamic emerging industry. And I think all of these cases, you have to be a bit careful not to take them as set in aspic, we would say in English. So, there's a difference between the very early startup phase, the kind of development progressive stage, and then embedding and formalizing. And so just one thing to say is I think all these three cases are really great examples of very dynamic processes that have been very much changing over time, adjusting. And what you can see is as the capacity of the emptying teams changes, then the ability for us to structure institutional arrangements changes. So I just want to really encourage people not to kind of ever think of these examples as sort of fixed examples. They're kind of examples that are relevant in the stage of the development process that is occurring. And that requires us as supporters to be very dynamic and active. That brings me to a second point, I think, which is I just want to channel the spirit of a very dear colleague of ours who passed away this year, Kevin Taylor, who always used to say that it's important to remember that when you arrive in a place, people are already drinking water and already defecating, and there's always something going on already. And I think one of the really nice aspects of these stories is that they have these three projects have really tried to use the existing faulty, imperfect systems as the basis for starting to develop a better, more robust, maybe better regulated system. You pay a price for doing that because it's harder and it can be a bit clunky and a bit imperfect, but the big value is that you bring that whole community, in this case of informal workers, along with you as part of the solution, and you can be building their capacity. So I do think it's really important that we're just cautious about imposing sort of idealized models from above. There's a tension between doing that, which has some merit, and really trying to sort of use what we have on the ground and the capacity and the people that we have on the ground. That's the sort of second thing that I would like to say. The price we pay is sometimes these stories feel a bit incoherent at certain stages because we're sort of transitioning from a sort of slightly chaotic into a more formal. I would love to think that in 5 years' time we'll be back in this room looking at these three cases, and they'll be really embedded, robust, and they'll look much more like, for example, some of the great examples that Mira's been sharing from Maharashtra. The final thing I want to just say is about data. Obviously, I would say this, I'm an academic, but I like to think I'm a fairly pragmatic academic. I think really trying to dig into that documentation and understanding of how these businesses are working is super important. And one of the things I think we've really learned from doing this work, and maybe you got that sense from Jonathan's slides, is that there are two very different business model questions we have to ask. One is, how sustainable is the total system? But also, how sustainable are the individual businesses and enterprises and pieces which make up that system? And I think sometimes in the WASH sector, we tend to think about business models as a kind of, it's all going to be private, or it's all going to be the state, or it's all going to be something. But actually, a really interesting question is within that, how viable financially and socially is this cooperative? How viable is this private enterprise? And I think really just Jonathan's work has been, I personally think, fantastically useful in shedding a light on why some parts of the system are under incredible tension, because it turns out, if you look very closely, that we're expecting some people to work at very, very fine profit margins or even loss, and that's what causes disruption in the system. So just wanted to encourage people to be really explicit and clear about the full costs, and look at those full costs and revenues for the whole system and for the individuals. But in conclusion, just want to say it's been an absolute joy to see these 3 projects. You know, they're complicated, they're challenging, they're messy, they're full of people that do annoying things occasionally, and, you know, messy things occur. But I think the ongoing support that Practical Action have been able to put in place has been really important in sort of building up and seeing these approaches growing and embedding. It's a very different business from just turning up and building a piece of infrastructure and leaving. And I think that's perhaps my final point, is that it's about this long-term dynamic partnership that we can see these cases really embedding. Thanks for giving me the opportunity, Lucy. It's been an absolute pleasure, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. As we're coming to close, thank you for your comments, and thank you very much to all of our speakers and to everybody who's helped put this together, and our team that managed to capture the videos, and Casper and Christine who've been helping at the back end of things. A huge thank you to everybody who's contributed, and those of you who have participated, thank you for your questions. If we haven't got to them, we will continue to try to answer them in the chat, and we would welcome any further input and feedback you might have. Please do look at the resources that we've uploaded onto the files section on the session page. You'll find our contact details on there as well, and you can have another look at the videos and some other great resources that we have got to share there. I think all that leaves it for me is to say that we hope that in the future we can continue to share as we are working on this journey of supporting informal sanitation workers to become part of that big systemic change at the citywide level. We'd love to partner and work with you more if that's something that also interests you. Thank you for participating, and enjoy the rest of your time at World Water Week. Thank you very much. Goodbye.